No one on that street could have imagined what she would go through on that rainy Saturday. It was late afternoon. The sound of heavy rain pounding against the windows filled the silence of the house, and she was alone, something that didn't happen often. The kids had gone to spend the weekend with their father, and although she tried to use the time to rest, loneliness sometimes weighed on her. She was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, when the doorbell suddenly rang. The dry, insistent sound made her heart race immediately. It wasn't common for someone to show up unannounced, especially at that hour and in the middle of a storm. When she opened the door, she saw a man drenched, clothes clinging to his body, hair dripping water, and eyes that at first glance only seemed desperate. He said his car had broken down just down the street and asked to use the phone since his battery was dead. At first, she thought about refusing, but something in his voice sounded convincing, and the situation seemed too real. She took a deep breath, let him into the hallway, and pointed to the landline on the living room table. He dialed a number, spoke a few rushed words, but she noticed no one had actually answered. The way he pretended to talk made her uncomfortable, and that's when the first strange feeling was born. Something was wrong. She tried to hide her tension, but inside her stomach was already twisted. While he talked on the phone, she noticed his eyes, scanning the room, observing every detail as if he were measuring the place. The way he held the receiver was odd. The conversation made no sense, and there was no voice heard on the other end. When he finally hung up, instead of thanking her and leaving, he started making small talk, asking if she lived alone, if she had family nearby, if she usually stayed in that house on weekends. Each question felt like a knife slowly sinking in. She answered briefly, trying not to show her nerves, but inside her mind was already screaming that she had to find a way out of that situation. The unease turned to fear when he took another step into the house without being invited. The air seemed to grow heavier, and she instinctively backed away, keeping her distance. The man, now without any disguise, let out a half smile that froze her body. He said something about needing to shelter for a bit, as if he had already decided he wasn't leaving. At that moment, her heart was pounding like never before. Memories of her children, of a full house, rushed to her mind, and the loneliness became even more cruel. She knew she had to act fast, but every move felt calculated not to trigger the wrong reaction. She began retreating toward the hallway, inventing some excuse that she was going to get him a dry towel, hoping to buy some time. But the man never took his eyes off her, as if he could read every hidden intention in her gestures. Her heart pounded so hard it seemed to echo in the silence of the house, and her breathing became short, hard to control. When she finally reached the bedroom, she slipped inside quickly and locked the door with the key, her hands shaking so much she could barely turn the lock. Outside, she heard his heavy steps in the hallway, and then the sound of the doorknob being forced. The metallic noise mixed with the storm outside created a suffocating atmosphere, as if the whole world were against her. He started knocking on the door, first gently, then harder and harder, while saying he just wanted to talk, that she was overreacting. But his voice no longer sounded pleading. It was cold and controlled, like someone who knew exactly what he was doing. She leaned her back against the door, tears streaming down without her noticing, and thought of her kids, how she couldn't let that day be the end of everything. In that desperation, her eyes landed on the bedroom window. The fear of getting hurt from the fall clashed with the panic of staying there. And in a matter of seconds, instinct took over. It was jump or be found. She opened the window with trembling hands, feeling the cold wind and the heavy rain hitting her face. Below, the backyard was soaked, and the fall wasn't small, but there was no time to think twice. Behind her, the sound of the door being shaken grew more violent. With her heart racing, she threw one leg out and leapt, landing sideways on the wet grass. The impact hurt, knocked the air out of her for a few seconds, but she immediately got up, ignoring the pain in her arm and knee. Desperation was stronger than any injury. She ran barefoot, cutting across the yard toward the neighbor's house. She banged on their door with all the strength she had, screaming for help while the rain soaked her even more. When the neighbor opened the door, startled, she could barely speak, only repeating, "There's a man inside my house." The neighbor quickly pulled her in and locked the door, asking his wife to call the police. Meanwhile, she shook uncontrollably, still with the feeling that at any moment he could appear behind her. The wait of just a few minutes felt like an eternity. Every sound from the street made her heart race even more until they finally heard the sirens approaching. When the police entered the house, the scene was exactly what she feared most. The man was still inside, completely at ease, rummaging through her drawers and going through her things as if he already owned the place. He didn't resist, but the look he gave when being handcuffed was etched into her memory like a silent threat, as if to say it wasn't over. The officers quickly confirmed that he was a wanted criminal for home invasions in the area, someone who had been tricking people with similar excuses. Hearing that felt like a shock. The realization that it could have been much worse almost made her collapse. Back at the neighbor's house, she could barely speak, only cried silently while staring at the floor. Her entire body ached from the fall and the tension, but her mind was what weighed the most. The idea that she had been alone, vulnerable, and that someone had used her kindness to get into her house ate away at her inside. Even surrounded by people, she felt exposed, as if no lock or latch would ever be enough again. The neighbor tried to comfort her by saying the worst was over, but she could only think about the sound of the doorknob being forced and his voice behind the door. Memories that seemed forever carved into her. That night, back in her own house, every corner felt strange. The smell of the wet clothes he had left, the footprints by the entrance, everything was a reminder of what had happened just hours before. She ran her hand over the drawers he had rummaged through, trying to put things back in order, but quickly gave up. It was impossible to return to normal, as if nothing had happened. Instead, she sat on the living room floor, hugging her knees, feeling the heavy silence around her. That was the moment she realized this house would never be seen the same way again. The place that had always been a synonym for safety had turned into a space of painful memories. Over time, she learned to move on, but she never again opened the door to a stranger without suspicion. The experience left invisible scars, like a constant alarm echoing every time the doorbell rang. To this day, when she remembers that rainy Saturday, a shiver runs through her body as if she were reliving every second. But she also recognizes that it was on that day she discovered a strength she never knew she had, the courage to jump out the window, to run, to fight for her life. And as much as the trauma never faded, that moment became the turning point that forever marked the way she sees the world.